Yeah, go ahead.
Is it any different from like, even if like you have cirrhosis of the liver from drinking and hepatitis?
It's a little bit different, but the same scar tissue is going to form. So any sort of inflammation, because hepatitis is a disease of the liver, and it causes inflammation. Any sort of inflammation over time will still cause scarring. Mm-hmm.
So what if you get a liver transplant and you got hepatitis? Aren't you just going to get it again now?
If the virus is still in your body, then yeah, you're going to get it again. But then you've got another window of 20 years or so maybe to live before the same thing happens. So your liver, gotta love it. Gotta take care of it. A healthy liver looks like red, almost red, shiny mahogany in color. It's really cool. So this is the Paddock portal system. This is just another picture of it. Like I said, I'm not interested in having you guys memorize all these vessels. You know, do know that blood from the small and large intestines are sent into this system. Okay, that's the intestinal tract. But this is really the big guy that I want you guys to know, the Paddock portal vein. The HPV. It's not very nice, but it's not a great mnemonic. Okay, fetal circulation. Again, what's different about the fetus's blood supply than your own, or the fetus's systems functioning? Getting its oxygen from the mother, so therefore it's not using its own lungs to get oxygen. If the baby was using its own lungs, it would just be sucking in amniotic fluid, and that wouldn't be any good. So the baby's circulatory system requires certain modifications or alterations in order to secure an efficient amount of oxygen and nutrients from the mother. So there are some unique structures that you would have never thought existed until you studied it in anatomy. So this is the fetal heart. A baby's blood oxygenation is never 100%. It's teetering around 70 to 80. Because it's not oxygenating its own blood, the only way it's getting oxygen is mixing mother's blood. This is the placenta coming from mom. The only way it gets oxygen is mixing mom's blood with the blood that's already in its body, the baby's body. So this purple blood here is representing a partially oxygenated partially oxygenated blood, so about 70 to 80%. You're seeing a couple extra vessels here. This vessel is the umbilical vein. So there are three major structures that travel through the umbilical cord. There is the umbilical vein, and there's the umbilical artery coming from the baby out towards mom. And then there's one more structure that we're not seeing that's called the urachus, and that's draining urine from the baby into the mom's system. That's not very cool, is it? Go ahead.
Why do we need their urine?
Well, I don't know. The baby is a parasite, man. The definition of a parasite is an organism that requires a host to live. It's what the baby is.
Isn't feces going back into the mother, is it?
No. No. Shouldn't be. So, what's funky about umbilical vein that you notice right off the bat? It's a vein, but it's red, right? Why is it called a vein still, though? Because it's sending blood to the heart. But the whole reason we're sending blood is to oxygenate that baby's system. So it is going to be oxygenated blood through that vein. That's another example of a vein that's oxygenated. And umbilical arteries, you see these leaving the baby's bloodstream and going back to mom. What is the purpose of these umbilical arteries? So the baby's deoxygenated blood is being sent back to mom. So technically, as the mother is not only sending the baby oxygenated blood, but taking all that deoxygenated blood and converting it to oxygenated blood. So, parasite, right? Absolutely. There are a couple other extras. So these are the first two structures that you see here, umbilical arteries and umbilical veins. Those create the bulk of the umbilicus, or the umbilical cord. This extra structure here, the ductus venosus, is a structure that allows blood from the mother to bypass the liver, the baby's liver. This is the baby's system. This is the mother. Baby, mom, ductus venosus. Why would you bypass the liver? What's the reasoning there?
So they don't get cirrhosis if I'm drinking while I'm pregnant?
That's a good point. Actually, I never thought about that though. Anything that, yeah, I suppose if there was some sort of liver disease, it could get passed on to the baby. But what? What? Whose responsibility is it really to clean the blood? It's mom's responsibility. So the baby doesn't need to use its liver, and it doesn't really use its own liver. We bypass the liver here. Blood enters then the right side of that baby's heart. Now remember, the baby's not going to use its lungs, so it's not going to use its pulmonary circuit. What side of the heart powers the pulmonary circuit? Which side, the right or the left, pumps blood to the lungs?
The left.
Right side, remember?
Oh.
Blood is sent out that pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary arteries. So what happens is as soon as blood gets into the right side of the heart, we do our best just to simply send it right over to the left side. Because we know the left side powers what? Sends blood into the aorta, which sends blood to the body. So we do everything we can to bypass the right side of the heart, because we don't want to send blood to the lungs, because if blood got into the lungs, it wouldn't do anything for us, right? There's no oxygen in the lungs. There's no reason to send blood there. So we're not using the lungs, therefore we put a hole right here in between the right and left atria, and we try to force blood directly over into the left side of the heart. That is called the foramen ovale, or oval hole. And if that foramen, once the baby's born, that hole actually closes off and fuses. But in some people, I guarantee somebody in this room has a foramen ovale that's not completely closed off. It's very common, but if you don't know at this point, that means that hole is so small that it's not affecting you. So here, in the baby though, absolutely, it's all the way open, because that allows us to do what's called a right to left shunt of blood from the right side straight into the left side of the heart, from which that left ventricle can contract and force that oxygenated blood out. Remember, this blood that's entering the heart is already oxygenated. Now, the bottom line is though, not all that blood is going to be sent out. So we have most of the blood gets over through that foramen ovale into the left side of the heart and gets out the aorta to the body, to all the organs. But some of that blood, through gravity, is set down into that right ventricle and is pumped. So, because the right ventricle is still pumping. Both ventricles are still working, just in case blood gets down there. But what do you see that's different about this heart than also another alteration on this heart that's not there in the mother, or in an adult's heart? See something right here. That looks funky, right? You see something coming out of the pulmonary trunk. Yeah, but it's connected to the aorta. That shouldn't be there. This doesn't exist. This little connection here does not exist in an adult. It closes off completely. Normally, in an adult, you just have pulmonary trunk and two pulmonary arteries. But now you've got an extra vessel connecting the pulmonary trunk to the aorta. Why is that there? Somebody explain to me why you would need that. Yeah, so it can escape straight into the aorta. It's actually a pretty ingenious system of tubing here. We can allow that, if in case that blood gets into the pulmonary trunk, it can escape directly as an escape route directly into the aorta, and it can be sent to the body. So we had two alterations that allowed us to bypass the lungs. What do you guys think? Yeah, good? Pretty cool, right? I mean, you've got extra stuff in there, and And eventually it all closes off, and you have a normally functioning circulatory system. As that baby takes, in the way that this happens, this closing off happens, is as soon as that baby takes its first breath, that is super important, because that completely switches the functioning of the heart from the right side to the left side, and the left side dominates that. So we've got, as soon as those lungs open up, it pulls, think of it like this, if you, no, I don't want to use that analogy. As soon as those lungs open up, it pulls blood into the lungs, okay? So you open up, it's just like breathing, right? If you open your lungs up, it pulls air in, that's inspiration, that's causing inspiration. It's the same thing here, if you open up the lungs, it pulls blood in. Okay, any questions? All right, normal condition after birth is, again, these holes close up. The ductus arteriosus, which was this structure up here that connected the pulmonary trunk to the aorta, that extra vessel, sometimes after birth, it doesn't actually close off, it stays open. But under normal circumstances, it closes off completely and just forms a little ligament. It's called ligamentum arteriosum. So that's the normal condition. Ductus arteriosus becomes that ligament. But the abnormal condition is that arteriosus doesn't shrink and stays open. It's called a patent ductus. What might you see? How might you know that this happened for a baby? What does that baby look like? Blue baby, right? This is a major cause of blue baby. And if you have that open connection, why is that baby blue?
Because the oxygen is the blood's deoxygenated.
You have mixing of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood, right? The blood that's pumped out of the left side of the heart is oxygenated, but every time you pump the right side of the heart, you send some deoxygenated blood into the aorta. So that's a bad situation, right? Not as bad as when the blood vessels were completely swapped with transposition of the great vessels, but still bad because you've got deoxygenated blood mixing. If another structure called the blank stayed open, the result would be the same. What's that other structure here? The hole in between the atrium. The foramen ovale, guys. If the foramen ovale stayed open, the result, blue baby condition, which is just low oxygen saturation of the baby, would still happen. Okay. Any questions on fetal circulation? It's kind of funky. Okay. Let's talk about blood pressure. Normal blood pressure, we said, was about 120/80-ish. That's what this graph is showing here. This is the systolic pressure. This is the diastolic pressure. Those are the two phases of the heart, right? We have one phase. What creates the systolic pressure? What is the heart doing in the systolic phase? When you've got high pressure in the vessels, that means the heart did what? It squeezed, it contracted. So that's the contraction phase of the heart. Causes systolic pressure, and relaxation of the heart is represented by the diastolic number. That's the lowest number red, lowest pressure red in the vessels is during the relaxation phase of the heart. So as this is representing the blood pressure in the big arteries in the body, the aorta, the brachial artery, all those arteries that are really close to the heart. And this is representing the blood pressure in the smallest arteries in the body called arterioles. As you get further and further away from the heart, and you get into capillaries here, the blood pressure goes down to about 20 millimeters of mercury. Those are just pressure units, 20 pressure units. And as you enter the venous system, again, you have 6 pressure units, anywhere from 6 to 0 pressure units. In the vena cava, which are those huge vessels that deliver blood back from your head and neck and your trunk into that right atrium, there's actually just 1 unit of pressure. So how is blood getting back to the heart then?